was hoping to bring you an interview with actor Grant Swanby this week, but technical matters are not cooperating with me, and only when it's just right am I going to show that to you, so keep a lookout for that. Getting on with our discussion of developing our spiritual side a little bit more consciously and feeling that we're taking it more into our own hands, I came across an article on the internet recently by psychologist Benjamin Hardy, which was all about taking control of your life. And that idea of taking control of your life really relates to two things that we are trying to achieve in our development of our soul life and our concentration on developing our own spiritual sensitivity and sense of taking care of one's soul on our own everyday terms without any special requirements. On the show, we've spoken about some of those special requirements as things that are very everyday. Meditation is something that you can do without any special equipment or special place or anything like that. Breathing is something that you can do pretty much exactly the same way, that whenever you have the time and space, just like with our other core practice movement, yoga or stretching or Pilates or whatever it's going to be, that are all things that you can do that allow you to kind of align body, mind, spirit, and get a greater sense of conscious development of those things. But it is of course also true that if it is the case that our spirituality is part of our everyday lives, then there must be things about our everyday lives that we can also do to improve the quality of that life. So I came across this article recently by psychologist Benjamin Hardy called Taking Control of Your Life. And it was, in his case, it was a list of a whole bunch of different things, partially based on studies and research, partially based on his own knowledge in his own field. There are things which give us a sense of greater control over our own lives. What struck me about the list is that some of them resemble practices that we know to be part of our spiritual life, or developing our own spiritual life, and also that many of the others were things that I related to or aspired to myself. So I thought I'd share my responses to some of the things that he mentioned, and perhaps you'll think about your responses to some of those things, and hopefully in a later show we'll be able to look at some other aspects of his list, because there are different kind of themes going on in it. But there were a couple of things that I really wanted to pick out that we can consider as part also of our practice of becoming more aware of our spiritual development. Of course, what struck me immediately, number 2 on his list is pray or meditate. He says 3 times a day, and 3 times a day sounds a little bit challenging for everyone. I'd prefer to say 1 to 3 times a day. Whatever it is, what I think is important about that is developing it as a routine rather than some where it starts interfering with your life. But if you can manage it 3 times a day, go right ahead. But it is important that the practice of reflection, whether it's meditation, whether it's prayer, any way that you extend yourself beyond your everyday self and your very self-conscious mind, that's going to really help you get a better grasp of and a better sense of power and control over what's happening in your life, even when you don't really have that much control. It's because it steps us a little bit outside of ourselves, and that's really has a lot of benefits, not the least of which is that greater sense of it's not all overwhelming me. So even if you start there, prayer is great. If prayer works for you, if you're someone who prays, it's also a great way to reach beyond yourself and reach to what could, for you, be an important way to connect with something greater than yourself. Another item on Hardy's list that really struck me, and which I strongly relate to, is reading 1 book per week. Now, as I've just said, I don't want to get too prescriptive about how many what. And we can't necessarily always manage one book a week. But what I like about that one book a week idea is that it makes the point that it's kind of a little bit easier to do than you probably think that it is. And so it might not exactly be once a week, one per week, but the point about the way that you would read one book a week is to read a bit every day. Now, I think I've seen it said elsewhere that to manage a book a week, you would actually need to read an hour a day of a particular book. That is a very desirable goal, and one that probably isn't as hard as you think, if that's maybe half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening or something like that. Or if it just means tone down some of the TV or other sources of distraction like the internet, which also does come up on the list. More about that in a second. But what is really important is that if we continuously feeding ourselves, it doesn't really matter what it is, new knowledge, whether it be novels or non-fiction, and ideally you should do a little bit of both. We really grow our understanding of ourselves when we see ourselves through unexpected lenses. You know, if we keep on reading things that we only are very strictly what we're interested in, if we keep on going to those sites and interacting with those people who are similar to us, then we're actually going to end up with quite a narrow view of the world and of ourselves, perhaps. But if you constantly allow yourself input that you might not otherwise have read, you're going to come across things which reflect you back to yourself, which reflect your life back to you, and which might even offer solutions to some of the issues and problems in your life in unexpected ways. That's why you need to keep a few novels, fictional works, feeding in to your input. And obviously, you want to be interested in everything you're reading, but you've got to allow yourself this latitude that says it's not only that stuff. Too many people only read self-help books or only read financial help or how to succeed, and all of those are great books to read. And you know, for me, one of the ways that I read books is sometimes doing exercise with headphones on, listening to the book. That can be a good way. If you've got a very busy life and you go to gym, get an audio book. You download them online just as easily as buying any book. And you can listen to it while you do gym and feel constructive and not have no time to do it and all of those kind of things. But the point is we really want to expand ourselves. So meditation allows us to stand outside of ourselves and look at ourselves. And reading allows us to reflect on ourselves through eyes that we might not normally see and through eyes which are not our own. And I think that can have all sorts of beneficial consequences. So, you know, I wish I could get it up to one a week, but I am pretty close to that most of the time. And it's just by doing a little bit every morning. So getting up early in the morning is probably a good thing. Hardy does have that on his list. He talks about go to bed early and wake up early. I think what is important about that one, it is very good advice, is that we also get enough sleep. A lot of research, especially more recently, has shown the detrimental effects of not enough sleep, and that is less than 7 hours a night. So much more detrimental effects than we actually believed or understood in the past. Given me a lot of pause for thought, because I'm a very early riser, but I wouldn't say that I'm an early to bed kind of a person. And what I'm guilty of course, is wanting more time in my day, perhaps like to read books or whatever. I don't have too much time for that. So we need to also be a little bit reasonable about it and to accept that sleeping actually is as good as many of the other activities that we do ourselves, but not too much sleeping either. What Vedic wisdom from India teaches us is that too much sleep makes us lethargic and escapist, and it tends to bring our energy right down. That's quite a detrimental thing. It's like a dead energy and it drags you right down if you have too much of it. Too much of anything is very much not a good thing, and too much of sleep is one of those. So 7 or 8 hours a night is what the current thinking is, and kind of always has been, in terms of how much you should be sleeping. You know, it reminds me that when I was a child, I always used to hear that you're supposed to work 8 hours a day and sleep 8 hours a night, and you did always hear that. You know, when I grew up, I realized that's only 16 hours, and that was a pause for thought, as no one ever mentioned the other 8 hours, and sleep was already covered there. The other 8 hours is, of course, recreation and non-work stuff, play. So even if it includes chores and running around with the children and doing, even if you manage to do 2 hours of non-work, fun, play things for yourself per day, that would really be a minimal requirement and not asking too much. So along with sleeping the required amount of time, and on Hardy's list as well, is a certain amount of play. So Hardy's, he says 1 hour, and that's what I realize and I reckon is probably honestly what most of us can only fit. But the point is to make it a guilt-free hour, that you allow yourself 1 hour of relaxation, of playtime, of those kind of things, entirely on your terms. If you love what you do and that feels like play to you, that's great, but it actually isn't play. Play is what we do for ourselves that only benefits ourselves in feeling more like ourselves. It doesn't have an outcome. It doesn't have a goal. It just makes me feel more like myself. When we're creative, we do that. When we play a sport that we love, we do that. Anything that really just gets us away from all the stuff that distracts us from ourselves. And actually, very much work is one of those, even when it's work that we love. Because the self is actually what's not being addressed there. So that creative or playtime, which is not rest time, is that. Rest time, remember, has got its own 8 hours. So 7 hours of sleep and 1 hour nap per day, you actually still fit into the paradigm. Again, we mustn't be too rigorous about numbers, because it just makes it easier for us to go wrong and fall off the wagon. But more importantly is to get the principle of the little bit of playtime every day that is the benefit of balancing with the work and the sleep, and it allows us actually to grow ourselves. It's a very important thing to have a feeling of who you are, and so much of what we do distracts ourselves from who we are. So one of the things that Hardy talks about is that you need to say no more often and do more things for yourself. And you might think for a moment that it sounds terribly selfish, but what it reminds me of is something said by the Roman philosopher Seneca, writing about 2,000 years ago. Seneca was a famous Stoic philosopher. And he said that, everyone has this feeling that life is too short and that they never have time to do anything that they really want to do, but they put it on their bucket list and they'll do it when they retire. It's interesting, 2,000 years ago sounds exactly like ourselves. And it is. We haven't changed that much. And he says, and they all fear aging and fear death at the same time, because especially there isn't enough time. The point that he makes is that firstly, you don't know when you're going to die. So saving things until you retire is not necessarily ever going to give you the chance to do what you want to do. The reason, he says, why we have the feeling that we never get to do what we want to do is because we spend so much of our time doing things for other people, doing stuff that we have obliged ourselves to do that really isn't something to ourselves. And as a result of that, we've never got the time to do our own stuff, and it always feels that we don't have enough time. He says if you do it the other way around, if you prioritize what you have to do for yourself, do that every day. And then you can squeeze into any bits of time left over the stuff that you have to do for other people or that you've obliged yourself to. And you've lessened that by saying no much more frequently. He he says then you'll always be getting done the things that you want to get done. You'll always feel that you're getting your stuff done. You'll always have your stuff done. So if you died tomorrow, it wouldn't really matter because you were doing what you've got to do. And the point that he makes, which is the fine point at the end of it, says Seneca, is that, and what you have to do is know yourself, find out who you are. Your job is to find out who you are. So, great wisdom from all those thousands of years ago. And we'll talk more about the wisdom of Seneca and his peers in a future episode. But what is important, of course, about what he's saying is that it sums up so many of the things that we have identified as important in understanding how to grow our sense of our soul. And Seneca clearly even gives us the why, is because he says the only thing you could be doing is knowing yourself. Everything else that you do is largely for other people, and you're going to die anyway. So your only possible option, the only possibility of what the best thing to be doing is, or the relevant thing to be doing, is figuring it out for yourself. But what also is important, wrapped up in all of that, is another very important principle that Hardy also raises, and that is familiar in Eastern philosophies and in Western philosophies like that. And that is, don't emphasize or focus on the outcome. It's so important to be in the present and be in the doing of what we do. So much of our disappointment in life arises out of focusing too much on outcomes and wanting specific outcomes too much. Even if you're not necessarily disappointed, those outcomes are rarely exactly like we think, and they pull us away from focusing where we are right now. If we focused only on the doing and assumed that every outcome is just the natural outcome of whatever we're doing, worst case scenario, it'll just say, do it better and better if it isn't coming out the way that is desirable or that seems to you to be the outcome that you like. If you stop focusing on that outcome, there isn't even a question of the outcome that you like. So it's all about living in the present. It's very much there, as I've said, in Eastern philosophies, and clearly there in very much core Western ideas, like which Seneca expresses 2,000 years ago, that is really all about focus on what's tangible, focus on what you actually are doing, focus that around yourself. It doesn't mean that we must become selfish. On the contrary, one of the important points about taking control of your life that Hardy also refers to is doing things for other people once a day. And that's a great thing to do. It's a really good balance also to ensure that you don't become wrapped up in yourself as kind of the alternative. So we certainly don't want to do that. But it does mean that it's another way of extending yourself beyond yourself and, importantly, keeping the ego down. It's easy to fall into a pattern very quickly of self-congratulation because you're doing things for other people. So, to stop yourself doing that, don't tell anyone that you do that. Don't mention it. If you're doing it in some way where you can do it anonymously, do that too. Find ways that just allow you to experience the purity of being non-self-centered, and learning ways that you can find avenues for that in your life, especially in your spiritual life. That's the balance against what we've spoken about as Seneca's philosophy of focusing around yourself and making sure that you get your task of self-knowledge done. It might sound to you like I'm saying, give up work and let's just spend all our time getting to know ourselves. And that is not the intention of philosophers like Seneca or any of those philosophers who are really trying to talk to us in our homes and in our lives. It's not about going to a special temple or hanging around the forum and discussing philosophies or any of those things. They're trying to say, as the difficulty of living is so full of things like work and chores and fate, dealing with things that you're not in control of and stuff that happens to you, all of those kind of things are outside of our control, and we have to be in reaction to them so much that all we can do is find ways to take this greater sense of control over what we do have access to. Idealists like Seneca indeed probably do think that we should be spending all our time doing that, but that's where we can say, you are 2,000 years ago, even if it does sound like the Romans were having a bit of a rat race of their own. If you read that story of how no one ever seems to think they have enough time, it does give one pause for thought. What did we never learn in all these thousands of years? So you can take control of that for yourself. But what Seneca doesn't have, and what we do have, and what's kind of made it worse for us, is the internet. So a very important point that Hardy also raises is that you need to control yourself with social media, and there are two ways that he talks about we can do that. One of them is not respond to emails or messages until an hour and a half after you've woken up. That's such a great tip. If you respond to them immediately, you are in reaction mode from the minute you get going. And you know how much something like that can upset one. So rather don't go there for the first hour and a half where you've built and strengthened your foundation for that day. And once you've done that, you're ready to deal with, on your terms, what might come to you through social media and email and everything else. The other one, of course, is dealing with social media like Facebook, etc., where we are exposed to so much pulling and pushing and liking and complaining and all of those kind of things that we just need to take a break. So take a 24-hour break from that once a week. Don't answer your emails and messages until 90 minutes into the day. Take a fast from the internet once a week for 24 hours. And that one is going to be a powerful change in your life. Linked to that is also taking a fast from news. Don't expose yourself to news all the time, because we have so much more news that people think the world is actually worse than it is, and it isn't that great. But a good example is that we think that there's more war than ever, and actually there's much less war than there's ever been on this planet before, which there is too much, but there's much less than there's ever been. But you'd never know that by watching TV. So rather don't watch TV, just watch it every now and then. Don't read news feeds all the time. Most of it these days is fake news as it is. But apart from that, we're inputting all this unnecessary information that in no way helps us understand ourselves, become more conscious, grow ourselves, or any of the above. So take a fast from that. Similar to, and I'll finish on this because we're going to also be talking about this in the future, taking a fast from food too. You know, it was controversial, but it's becoming less so. It's increasingly apparent that intermittent fasting, which is mostly 24 hours once a week, but can be extended to further for more experienced people. But the fact is, taking a break from food once a week, which certainly isn't going to hurt you, gives your body so much of a rest. It didn't used to be believed, but the results are there. I can vouch for that. And Hardy, the PhD psychologist, he actually says, let me actually look, he lists the benefits like improved digestion, mental clarity, mental and physical vigor, removing toxins, improving vision, and giving a feeling of well-being. It really does do all of that. And he says, honestly, I could go on for hours about this one. Give it a try, you'll never be the same. For a guy who's writing a list of 50 things that you can do to change your life and take control, to say, honestly, I could go on for hours about this one, you'll never be the same. And he pulls it out this way. He's got a good reason. And trust me, it really is pretty life-changing once you learn to do that. Simplest way to do that, stop eating after dinner and eat again the next dinner. And keep it at as close to 24 hours as you can. 22 hours is fine. 21 hours is also fine. And you'll notice very quickly within a few weeks how different you feel, how your energy starts changing. But you do start seeing that difference. I'll vouch for that. So we'll be talking about more ways to take control of your life in episodes ahead, and we'll be speaking to our guests about that topic as well. We've got a couple of really interesting ones lined up, and I'm going to ask them that question as well. In the meanwhile, of course, you can stay tuned to the Facebook page where you will always find information about whatever's coming next and whoever's coming next, and where you can also find information about my upcoming book. The book is being released this week. Look out for it in bookshops, look out for it online. You should see it by the end of the week if you're looking for it. And if you still want to join me at the launch here in Cape Town on Thursday night, the 9th of November, you need to act fast. So go to our Facebook page, check out the ad for the book and RSVP to that address, because otherwise you won't have a seat. But you'll have a seat here next Friday. So I will see you here at that time.